It's just prompting a complete rethink around software strategy. How do you build a venture scale business in some of these categories, and rethinking the playbook that's worked for the past 10 or 15 years and I think is very clearly not working in the same way today.
Hey there, I'm your host, Justin Rice from Climate Tech Canada. When we talk about AI in the climate space, we're often talking about data centers, energy use, water, efficiency, all those interesting, hard problems. But there's another area where AI is changing how we build climate solutions, specifically in software. A whole generation of climate tech was built around a specific set of assumptions: unlock proprietary data, build custom machine learning models to make it useful, and expand from there, creating competitive advantages that were worth backing at venture scale. The classic example here would be climate accounting and management software, but there's applications across utilities, water, you name it. But over the last few years, and in particular a few critical weeks in December 2025, those assumptions started to get challenged. All of a sudden, AI is good enough at writing code to turn an idea into a passable piece of software. And open source and cutting edge models have the potential to outperform custom built models. This shift, often called the Saaspocalypse, is already having a real impact, wiping billions off software valuations and forcing many investors to pause and rethink their investment thesis on software. A lot of ink has been spilled on what this means for software broadly, but I wanted to zoom in on what this means for climate and energy software specifically. To do this, we have both the founder and investor perspective. We're joined today by Geordan Hankinson, partner at Renewal Funds, a Vancouver-based impact VC firm, and Mike Hejmej, CEO at Senpilot, an AI operating system for utilities. Geordan has backed and exited climate startups under the old software playbook, while Mike is building squarely inside the new one. This conversation is a little different than our typical episode. It's much more thinking out loud and testing assumptions than laying out a clear path forward, because there's so much uncertainty about what comes next. We set out to do two things in this conversation: unpack what's concretely changed in software and how the old playbook is breaking down, and outlining a speculative new playbook for climate founders building today. Along the way, we stress test the thesis that anyone can build production-ready software in a few hours or days. We talk about Mike's insights on how buyer behavior is changing in utilities and regulated industries, and how incumbents should respond to AI native challengers. If you're building or investing in climate software, I hope this conversation helps sharpen your thinking and add some new perspectives. And if you have a different take or want to challenge something that we talked about, we'd love to hear from you. And now, my conversation with Geordan and Mike. Geordan, Mike, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation. Maybe we'll start off with Geordan. So you've been investing in climate tech for a while now, often with a focus on software. So maybe just kick us off with a quick intro to, your work at Renewal Funds, and then what's kind of been drawing investors to software in this sector.
Cool, great. Yeah, so Renewal's been in this space for a while, and just a quick preview, we are going to be relaunching our brand from Renewal Funds to Renewal Climate Ventures in the coming weeks. So it'll be a kind of exciting relaunch and rebrand. We got our start as a firm back in the 90s in sustainable consumer, and then over time layered in a lot of this kind of climate tech, infrastructure software investing, and that's become increasingly our sole focus. And so the brand relaunch will kind of capture that in our name and web presence and branding. And so, soft launch today on the Climate Tech Canada podcast. You heard it here first. And so I think the playbook that we and many other funds in this space invested behind for, over a decade is the shift to cloud. Meant that in a lot of legacy industries around transportation infrastructure, energy infrastructure, the built environment, there was a lot of legacy software that had been built in the 80s, 90s, 2000s. It was on-prem. It didn't work very well. There was a lot of orphan data that had real business value. And startups kind of recognizing the shift to cloud in 2010, 2015, realized that they could tap into these abandoned orphan sources of data, build a custom trained ML model, which was, very novel at the time, deliver some real customer value, build a SaaS wrapper around that, and build a wedge product that could earn them trust and the right to build a platform across a customer's whole business. And so this was a playbook that was used, kind of across industrial software, definitely in climate. We backed many successful companies that grew to, very significant revenues and successful exits: Myovision, Swiftly, Aquatic Informatics, Opus One Solutions, all using a variation on this playbook. And I think the Saaspocalypse was sort of like the market event that woke everybody up after everybody sort of spent Christmas break coding with Opus 4.5 and Claude Code, and realizing like just what a huge capability leap had kind of happened in Q4, really. And yeah, so I think it's just prompting a complete rethink around software strategy. How do you build a venture scale business in some of these categories, and rethinking the playbook that's worked for the past 10 or 15 years and I think is very clearly not working in the same way today.
Perfect. I think that's a great kind of grounding for this conversation. It's wild how that, 2 month period at the end of the year last year just kind of kicked off this whole flurry of activity and like reconsidering like, okay, what does this actually mean? It really felt like a leap forward in the matter of weeks. Mike, you're building squarely in this space now. We talked a lot about some of these legacy customers. Could you give us a quick version of what Senpilot is building, and maybe just a bit of background on how you found yourself here?
Sure. So we're building an AI system for utilities, and that's a very vague statement. But as we think about it, we think about a world where agents do work end to end. And in utilities, we've predominantly started in engineering. So we see a lot of parts of the world slowed down by humans, by consultants, by not enough resources put towards engineering. So when you think about having to add a data center, having to add a new subdivision because the community is growing, these are all tasks that take a lot of electrical engineering talent and time. So we're building a system that automates that. Think about it like Cursor. 2 years ago, we were playing with Cursor. I like to gloat to my engineering team that I was a few months ahead of everyone. They thought this thing was terrible. And as a reminder, it was terrible. I had to copy paste code. It wasn't automatic, but it was still much faster than looking at Stack Overflow. So much has changed. Opus, now even Fable, I played with that 2 weeks ago, where again, another step change. So that's what we've been working on. We're playing with the tools. We're constantly thinking about what it means for the future. And for us, to Jordan's playbook, I think for us, it just means more ambition. So software isn't dead, right? Maybe to frame my point of view on the conversation, I don't think software is dead. I just think easy software is dead, right? If software was truly dead, we wouldn't be having this meeting on my, M5 MacBook Pro with 128 gigs of RAM running all these softwares.
Perfect. Yeah. And so you started building kind of like right around this inflection point. Could you maybe just unpack a little bit about like is there like a different architecture or different set of assumptions under which you're building? Like, is there something that you're building today that just wasn't possible even like 2 or 3 years ago?
Yeah, we catch ourselves bifurcating it into two kind of groups, right? And I think everybody's been focused on this group. And I remember Jordan and I were talking about this months ago. There's the group on the right, which is the obvious group, which is you can build these AI tools that didn't exist before. And that's what we're building, AI engineering that didn't exist before. But if you're talking about how we organize and how we build nowadays in 2026, there's this group on the left, which is actually more meta, which is we also use AI to build. So we're building AI, but we're building with AI, and then just more AI everywhere. And so for us, it's really been, again, like, how can we do 100x more for our mission? And just to maybe paint that, I like to be very specific. To paint that for folks, Jordan mentioned a wedge product. You think about like one niche, and in climate, that could be something like a vegetation management software. Well, that's cute, but now we've got 140 softwares at the average utility, and every CTO I talk to is, how do I streamline it? And then the second conversation is, if I can't streamline it or can't streamline it all the way, how do I get an AI agent? Some have called it super agent, but I think this is a hilarious, just like semantic like puzzle. How do I get a super agent to go across the systems and then start stitching it together so I can get end-to-end work done? So our perspective is very aggressive. We want to build, kind of rebuild most of the platform to be AI native, which means rebuilding a lot of softwares, rolling them up, adding capabilities, and making sure our agent, which means harness plus an LLM, is able to service multiple softwares to do work end to end. I think that's crazy. And it sounds crazy. If you asked me to do this in 2016, if you asked me to do this in 2022, and we started, like you mentioned, we started 2024. I was thinking about this 2023. Like, this was not a thought, right? We were not thinking about Fable and how software engineering would be 100 or 1,000x maybe next year better.
Jordan, what's your take on, like, what have you kind of been observing? I know we kind of initially started this conversation around some of your observations around like the open source models and kind of, can they perform better than some of these like proprietary models that have been built over time? Just curious, like, yeah, what have you kind of been observing out there?
Yeah, I mean, I think this fundamental insight that Mike touched on is kind of the core of it, in a lot of respects, is that the Harvey founder a few weeks ago on Twitter was just talking about, like, we got all this advice to start with the wedge product, and we really believed that the technology was there to just build the whole thing. And as a startup, as Mike said, that sounds crazy. Like, that in the previous world would not have worked, because you came in and you would really have no right to win against the legacy platform incumbents, even though that software didn't really work that well. A company like Oracle or GE, like in these legacy industry spaces, they have a footprint everywhere. SAP is used, across the utility, in an energy context. And so, what right does a startup have to come in and disrupt that? Well, now these models are so capable, and you can throw so much into a context window that you previously had to, like, train 3 or 4 custom models and then have all this sort of janky, brittle software kind of stitching the outputs of that together to try to, like, replicate a platform level outcome. Now you can leverage all of these models, and I think we should circle back to this later in the conversation. But this idea of, do you throw everything into a state of the art context window, or do you stitch together the open frontier in terms of like GLM and Gemma and some of these open source models that are just like right nipping at the heels of the frontier? So that's an interesting separate topic, I think, from sort of just the strategy of productization and building itself. And so I think the market is rewarding companies that have unbounded ambition to really tackle the messy problem of, okay, utility customer, you have all of this siloed data. You have, as Mike noted, a million different point solutions that you're paying to solve all these bits and pieces. Let us try to solve the whole problem. And the customers that, or the startups that can earn trust, reputation, credibility doing that, are going to win very substantial market share, I think, in this kind of new world that we find ourselves in, that was not really possible to do a few years ago. And then I just want to make one additional point just on something Mike said, that SaaS is not dead. And I think this also ties into that point, is like, all of this at the end of the day is just SaaS. Like, AI software companies are just like the next evolution of SaaS. And what made you a valuable SaaS company? It was brand trust, reliability, auditability, all of the things that go into like your security, compliance, and everything in these contexts. And so all of that still applies. And that's, I think, just a really important piece in strategy and execution, that ultimately you have to, you win on trust and distribution in all of these markets.
Well, I like that you didn't say product. Why is product? You're like, trust, distribute. I'm like, well, brand. I'm like, where? Hey, product is important too.
Fair call out.
Yeah. Okay, so there's a bunch of things there we're going to circle back on. Really want to talk about the customer side and like how this shows up with utilities, and also what stays the same. But let's maybe jump to like what changes in the kind of classic climate software playbook. And I can think of like maybe a couple of examples where we've seen this. Like, I think of like kind of the Mio vision, like transit planning, like bringing all those data insights together. We can think of like carbon accounting and supply chain management, things like that. What actually changes in this, like in the climate software playbook now?
I think one of the pieces we've had our eye on is that a lot of these, call it like V1 or Gen 1 industrial climate software plays, kind of hit a performance asymptote in a lot of cases. Like there's many building optimization companies that took abandoned or neglected or poorly treated building data and built a model around that, integrated with IoT sensors or building control systems, and optimized commercial or residential buildings to the tune of like 15 to 20% in their energy use. And for the last 5+ ish years, it's been hard to find a company that has actually unlocked a greater level of energy efficiency or building performance improvement using that old playbook. And I think one of the ideas that we are sort of looking for and looking to is the next level of kind of climate performance unlock or asset efficiency unlock is probably not going to come from these custom trained models on, small data sets. It's probably going to come from large pre-trained model, just throwing like massive amounts of compute at the problem to merge, other sources of semantic business organization, contextual data, merging that with these legacy data sources that have previously been sort of the source of performance gain in these legacy assets. So that's something we're kind of looking to, and it's murky and sort of emergent, but something I'm pretty excited about. That there's this idea in AI of like the bitter lesson, where you take sort of a smaller model and pair it with human augmented data. That's never going to outperform just throwing compute en masse at a problem to try to solve the actual outcome that you're looking for. And so I think that's kind of something we're keyed in on right now.
Because I think the broader AI space is kind of like the open AI model, like throw more compute at the problem, build more data centers, and then we're seeing this emergence of like more efficient models and kind of like that split as well. Like, is there a point where just throwing compute at something has diminishing returns as well?
No. This has been just to live in like our shoes for 2 years. Before the concept of a harness was made, maybe this is helpful for folks. Our team was building a harness, and 2 years ago, I don't think our VCs do anything about what we're doing. They just started clicking a few months ago, and I think they loved it, and I loved it. But we failed like 14 times. But through every iteration of that harness, I think there was this one through line that was more AI. That'll solve it. Like more AI actually does solve it. And then we saw it this year. So our team was one of the first users of Claude Code as well. That was March of last year. All through the terminal, which I kind of hated that transition, but it was fun. And then Claude kind of sucked. It sucked in February, March of this year. And it was slower, and it was because they were compute constraint. And so Codex, which was a worse model, and I've tried it many times, and my team had tried it many times, suddenly out of nowhere was outperforming. And there wasn't even a new model release. There wasn't behind the scenes at friends at Anthropic and OpenAI. It wasn't just more parameters. What there was just more time. It was slower. It was like 5 times slower than Claude. But whenever I gave Codex a task and Claude a task when I was coding something, Codex would get it right, and Claude would kind of miss some key things. And I think that was all a function of time. So I think, Justin, that's like the most important question, which is, if we can just continue to see scaling laws in time, running longer models, running more AI on top of AI on top of AI to get to the, past the frontier, to Jordan's point, that's how GLM 5.2 is doing so well. Like you pair it and you run it longer, and maybe it's as good as Fable. I don't know, no comment. But if that continues to hold true, I think there's like this other topic that people should start discussing, which is like, what does that mean for energy? Because we'll have more efficient models and that'll push it this way, but we'll also use more compute that'll push it that way. What wins? Probably more compute over time is a good bet, and that just means we're going to need like way more electrons than anyone's prepared to admit right now.
Which is already, I think, top of mind for absolutely everybody, is how much energy and water and everything this amount of compute is already using. Just to come back to the wedge model, and Mike, I want to get your take on that, because like it sounds like there's there's an aspect there of like the tech and also the business model of like how do you actually like enter the market? Do you come in as the wedge or kind of like build that whole platform? Can you just like maybe share your take on that platform approach and kind of aggregating across? And is that something that you see is going to be kind of the new normal?
Yeah, well, to your second point, I don't know if it'll be the new normal. Certainly, competition's higher if people think it's the new normal. So I can't probably be smart enough to guess on that. But to your first point and to Jordan's platform play, in utilities, and we'll just focus there because every vertical and industry is different. In utilities, they've been burned so many times. And I think Jordan is smiling, right? They're promised the world. And this was pre AI. They were promised the world for 5, 10, 15 years. Cloud, everything will be better. SAP will, for HANA, move to cloud, things are better. And they have just almost instinctively started to have heartburn and push against this idea. So now we've got this technology, we've got AI, where you can actually do a platform play. You can build more than you've ever built. You can partner up with Fable, GLM 5.2 codecs, and really truly push output at speeds that were unimaginable. And now you've got somebody like me or Jeff on our team who helps with our utility sales and partnerships. We come in and we say, hey, we've got a wedge. These are these like 2, 3 products that I know are valuable today. For us, let's say it's asset management or grid visibility, which people purchase. Like, how can you interact with your grid and understand all the bottlenecks in plain English while seeing it? We've got this wedge and we come in. And then the conversation around what the full deployment looks like is murky because it's how do you trust me that I can actually build this grand vision when you've been burned 6 times in a row, 10 times in a row now by every vendor out there, including some of the names we mentioned like GE and Oracle and Schneider. So I think there's going to be, a leap of faith, and there's going to be startups who want to do this playbook, and there's going to be an opportunity to do it right. I think there'll be just as much opportunity to do it wrong and continue to create heartburn for many of the executives doing this battle. But I still think at the end of the day, Jordan's point on the first thing he said was trust, right? Trust is definitely the name of the game in the utility space. So if we can come out with something easy, we think of it as TTV. So time to value 0. That's our goal on our team for this year. If we can come out with time to value equals 0 for a product, like that's why we launched a regulatory product, which is no integrations, then everybody's excited. It starts to build momentum and trust. And then it's easier for the executives and leadership team who are, usually, not to stereotype, usually in their 60s and staying on longer than they wanted to. They're usually in that room with us and they're saying, okay, you know what? We're going to trust this team because so far it's been really great. They're building very fast. I can feel the speed of what they're building. Let's see if we can expand. So that's been our experience. I don't think it'll be universal, but it sort of gives you the color for why it's been different than before.
For you guys, the oh wow moment, I think in your demo comes from when you are in the engineering kind of operations product and you're pulling in insights from these other modules. Like that's always been the promise of the platform, is that dear customer, you will see all of this extra value when you are going to do your sort of scheduling or operations planning, because we're the platform and we have all this other data. And in reality, that promise, as you noted, has not really played through in the way that slide decks from the last decade have sort of shown. And you've been able to have those wow moments very quickly. And I think that's just like exhibit A, I think, in a lot of these sectors for how you can kind of architect that platform vision, show your customer what it's capable of. Mike, we had this conversation a few weeks ago. Like, how do you interface and interact with those like mission critical legacy systems that like SIME, for instance? This is software that's been used to do distribution system planning for like decades. The utilities trust it. It may or may not go anywhere in the next decade or 2 decades. Like, how do you think about your product interfacing with some of those legacy endpoints?
Yeah, I mean, we're just gonna kind of be like silly putty that fits into the cracks, right? And I think over time, we'll rebuild those processes. And I hear that's a question I would actually just defer to like my utility partners, like all the executives I work with. I think I've heard pretty brash statements about, you know what, that generation, they're not going to change, but they're retiring. 50% of the workforce, fun fact, in utilities is retiring in the next decade. That's from the department. You can source me on that. That's from the Department of Labor in the US. And so when you think about that sort of like 50% drop, you think it's going to come with opportunity to change. But you got to take that and also reconcile it against the fact that I've got all of these young, mid 20-year-olds right out of school who are keen engineers, and I've met them from coast to coast across North America. I can see their faces, and these are the folks that come in and they say, "I'm going to automate. I'm going to use AI tools. I'm going to do this 100 times faster because I was, not born with it, but they feel like it. They've been born with ChatGPT." And I think you're going to want to try and run both parallel tracks at the same time, and you're going to end up with a little bit of like a mess where you might be multi-process for a bit, but in an ideal world, eventually, I believe that most front end gets buried in headless. Like I definitely believe in Mark Benioff's headless Salesforce because I built the headless CRM, and we have a headless CFO and finance app for our company, right? And I think that's the operating system of the future is going to be more and more headless. So we'll see a transition, right?
I kind of wanted to poke on, I think to the extreme, there's this version of the story that's like 20 something can rebuild an app on the weekend. I'm going to like rebuild Shopify over the weekend or whatever it is. I think this idea that AI lets a single person build a credible climate software product in a couple of days and hours. Maybe Jordan, we'll start with you. Like, how credible is that a threat to companies that have been building over the old model? Is that a reality? Because like there's also things like compliance and auditability and all these other kind of things that I think come with it. It's not just, oh, this, is a piece of software that can solve your problem.
Yeah, this was in the meta like January, February with the Saaspocalypse, like all over Twitter. That one of the reasons for the re-rating and kind of massive multiples compression you saw in software stocks is not just that. To Mike's point, UIs are going to be sort of disintermediated. Everything's going to be headless, run on agents. It's not just that there's going to be all these companies replicating everything that SAP and Salesforce and everybody else does. It was also that customers are going to vibe code their own apps. And that sort of popped up for a few weeks. And then everybody was like, actually, no, that's nonsense. That's not going to happen. Nobody's going to rip out Salesforce. Nobody's going to rip out these like trusted systems of record that companies in big industries have been using for forever. And I'm sort of two minds on this topic a little bit, because I think in SMB, inside startups, inside many of the companies we've backed, we are seeing like very rapid self-build. Startups have been using a piece of software to do a thing. It never really did it perfectly well. And turns out if you just load all of your complaints as well as like a link to the website into Opus, Fable was crazy at this. And it's a bummer as a Canadian. We're probably not going to get it again. I'm hoping GLM, continues to improve. But you could just put this stuff in and you get these incredible apps. So we had a piece of ESG software we'd been paying for many, many years to use. We had all these feature requests, things that just never really worked quite as well as we wanted them to. We were also paying like 15 grand a year for it. And Emily, who is our impact data operations, ESG, all things, she's super subject matter expert on all of these things and has never coded a day in her life, hadn't heard of Claude Code, and came back from Christmas break and was like, hey, these tools are pretty capable, Emily, like, why don't you download Claude? Just see what happens. And boom, within 2 weeks, she had this incredible app. We churned off of our ESG software. We're using the app that Emily built. It worked super well. Our portfolio companies all interface with it. We haven't done a net promoter score check yet, but I think we will, just because it'll be fun and interesting to see. So there's like things about that are not realistic for large enterprises, right? In terms of like, now you've got your business unit champion or subject matter expert supporting like use of this custom internal software that has like security considerations, integration considerations, all of those things. But as we move like more towards AGI, ASI, like as these models become more capable, the more I'm kind of bought in that like customers vibe coding their own things to do stuff that's important to them is probably like a growing threat to startup SaaS incumbents.
I love that. I would agree with you for what it's worth, right? Like, I think the bar has just increased. That's all. Like, we're saying it two different ways, which is like when we do buy or build, and when my customers do buy or build, it used to be that the math looked like this, and you'd balance it. Now that bar is just 100 times higher. So the math might be like, yeah, if I have to maintain this, if I have to add features, if I really need to put in 100 different systems, if this is going to take 10 weeks of wrangling all of my SMEs across the business, like that's where the weight starts to shift. But I totally understand. And this is a great guy. Like, I love listening to him, but I understand why Monday is trading under 1 times revenue ish, right? If you take out cash, that's crazy.
I'm curious how you folks are thinking about moats. Like, does the nature of a moat or having moats change in this new world? Like, I heard a lot more about customer engagement or the kind of like compliance side of it. It seems to be kind of in like two buckets. Like, we're super hands-on customization, working directly with the customer, or this is really compliance focused and we've locked down security and we're gonna maintain that. Like, how does that kind of moat side of things and that defensibility change in this new paradigm?
Rather hear Jordan's opinion first, and then I'll tell you mine. We might have very different opinions. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
Well, I think moat A is the moat that's always been there, which is the benefits of compounding and just doing the thing and going faster. How can we do the thing that we were going to do in 10 days and do it tomorrow? How can we do the thing that we were going to do tomorrow and do it tonight? That is the startup moat. I think in many respects, and that's truer than ever. The companies that are there is a very large difference, like even in our own portfolio, between the companies that we see just like accelerating and accelerating and accelerating and pulling forward roadmap things that we were talking about for like 2027, 2028, they're done already. That's awesome, super exciting. And just like, I think that is a moat. And that's just a kind of intrinsic team grit, speed, hustle factor that's sort of hard to quantify, but is kind of everything in some respects within the venture business. Then I think the other piece of the moat that we are really looking for, beyond all the things we've already talked about, is companies that have physical infrastructure tie-in, and not just as a kind of optional, nice to have intelligence layer on top of infrastructure, but actually the business model integrates infrastructure in a real way. And that's like a total flip. It's sort of embarrassing to say out loud because 5 years ago we were, you would get a premium as a startup for just being SaaS in a heavy sort of CapEx, OpEx world. If you could be the platform that only sold SaaS, you would get a huge, multiple uplift. And now it's all the VCs are sort of saying the same thing. They want like physical infrastructure tie-ins. But we are seeing this in a very real way. Like one of our more recent investments, Super Circle, is software and physical infrastructure to help brands recycle end-of-life clothing from across their whole value chain. And this wouldn't work if it was just software trying to sort of be an intelligence later on. Okay, brand so-and-so, you have all of these sources of waste. Here are some options that you could do and run to process this waste. No, like Super Circle has taken the software intelligence layer and integrated it with real world sortation and processing. And that's what makes it so valuable, because there's all of these two-sided network effects, data network effects, and just infrastructure paired with software in a way that's super valuable. And, they are growing really, really well. And it's a very good example, I think, of this kind of integrated business model that it's easier for us to get our heads around. And then software only, we're having a lot more brain damage than we were, a few years ago. So anyhow,
I'm also having brain damage. Yeah, I can't. I think about this so much, and like my team says, I'm always thinking 2 or 3 years, right? And they're just mad at me because they're trying to think about next month. But play it out to the extreme. I do this because I studied math, right? In math, we do these things called proofs, and proofs are always look at the extreme. Okay, say coding and these models get better. Say we figure out compute. Say they get both smaller and more powerful, and duration is faster than we could ever imagine. Like, what does 5 years from now look like for all these companies that are software based, not to Jordan's point, right? Hardware. We're not hardware. So what does it look for us? Well, if we can do the 2050 roadmap overnight, that's the extreme, right? The whole product's done, right? Imagine a world where the product's done tomorrow. So what do I have left? Well, with these agents, you can do anything you want, but it's a two-edged sword. You can do anything you want. So I'm already seeing this in a lot of software. I'm going to call out QuickBooks, and they're probably going to like send me an email to never say this again, but like their software has got 900 tabs on it, and they've added so many features and whistles that as a user, I had been using this for 15 years across different businesses, my parents' business as well. Like as a user, I'm lost, right? And this is one reason for maybe the headless case where I don't even want to see it. I want Claude to just go in and MCP to it or deal with like CLI APIs to deal with this. So for me, when I think about what the moat is, I like that Jordan didn't say product. Now I'm coming back to this because it might not be the product. It might actually be the trust. The product might just be a way to build the trust temporarily. But once the product's done and you've got the perfect, call it like agent solution to a problem, that's where the fun, I think, begins. And so we get asked this question of defensibility, and some great VCs have pushed on, can Anthropic or OpenAI get the data you have? That is an interesting question. So can the AGI, ASI eventually get a bunch of mock AMI utility data? Can they understand the workflows of engineers? I don't know industry to industry, but I know utilities. And I know in utilities, some of the utilities I've worked with have things on pen and paper. They have inspection reports that are still pen and paper. And so I think there might just be a very nuanced answer to this long term about what the foundation models can't get their hands on. And those sort of pockets or areas may have their own, I'm not going to say foundational because like that would make me sound like a lab. They're going to have their own vertical model that's going to be so proprietary and specific that you're going to have to argue that saving money or saving convenience by using an AGI model is going to be a better call, even though it's going to mess up your electrical designs half the time, right? So that's what we're betting on. I think it's going to be a bit of a proprietary data mode. I don't think that's a great answer for other industries because I genuinely think most data is available nowadays. But for some industries in some areas, that might be a really interesting playbook long term.
Tend to agree with you. There's a really interesting chart that Tom Tunguz put together that showed the early days of the cloud build out, and it was all dominated by capex and infrastructure and semis, and the application layer in terms of overall value actually was a very small part of it. And we're sort of in the same point in the cycle right now where NVIDIA and all memory, all of these semiconductor like picks and shovels to the AI boom and the infrastructure layer have accrued enormous value, and the application layer on a relative basis is still quite small. It is ultra concentrated, obviously, with Anthropic, OpenAI, etc. So there's sort of two arguments to that. One is like there's going to be this absolute explosion in application layer value, which like I think Mike totally fits with what you're saying. And the other thing that could fit is it might just be that in this case with AI, unlike the cloud boom where you had this massive dispersion of small SaaS companies, huge breadth in SaaS applications, it may be much more concentrated in terms of like application layer value, with some exceptions around these more difficult legacy infrastructure industries that climate tech so often interfaces with, which I think is good overall in terms of like, can you build a defensible climate tech AI SaaS startup? I would generally agree with Mike. Like the answer is probably yes. There's going to be these niches that you can carve out.
Yeah, but isn't that bad for society? Like if we have like call it 100 niche types of AI models and harnesses, and then everything else goes to Anthropic and OpenAI, right? Like we kind of see investors betting that way because I see seed is plateaued / like going down now, right? They're not getting to the A's. You're seeing insane amounts of money going to Anthropic and OpenAI, and even Mistral at Cohere, like Canadian, European models are getting a ton of money as well. And it just seems like the world or the investing world is betting on concentration of models, which would be a weird way to go. But then you get the open source models, and then I struggle to think all the time about how that monetization works, because as a user, I'm like, there's a point where I'm not willing to pay. Like every day, I tell my team, every day I get my Mercury notification and float notification that says like your team, your card has been charged $500 on Anthropic. And next day, another $500. I'm like, there's just a point where I don't want to see that every morning.
This is, I mean, the zone of uncertainty, like none of us really know how this is going to play out, right? But I totally agree with you, Mike. Like the world where it's just two massive behemoth closed source models that nobody has access to, and it's, those are it's Fable 25, and it's super intelligent, and it's recursive, and you have to pay $5,000 a month to access it. Like that is the nightmare world.
And to be fair, like I think the one thing people forget, and if you are listening to this podcast and you're not a coder, so you're not using Cursor or Claude or Codex, I think this will be really maybe like an eye-opening way to think about it. But it's like none of the benchmarks you look at matter. And that's my hot take. I have many, but like one hot take is that it's just BS, right? And the reason it's BS is because you look at these metrics and then you run them with real scenarios. So for us, what that looks like is we ask every new model to do line loss, which is an extremely hard problem. Like you're going to have to create many Python scripts, clean up data, figure out where you've got kilowatt hours leaking across the system. And I've been doing this for 2 years. And it's like, sometimes I'll look at a model release like Opus 4.1 versus Opus 4.0 when it originally released. And I'm like, wow, this was a regression. Like this is actually much worse. And there's this qualitative aspect. And so when you said Fable is amazing, I agree with you. And you look at some chart and it's like 10% better. My experience was it was like 100 times better because it was proactive. It reconciled a ton of accounts. I was like, this is insane, right? It was so smart. So if that is the world that we live in, maybe software will just be in a different format, and maybe it won't be as valuable. That's another corollary of this, right? Maybe if it's super easy to make something overnight in one day, if I can recreate Salesforce or SAP overnight with $10,000 worth of credits while I sleep, the agents do everything recursively. Like, what am I really paying for? Well, I'm paying for probably, again, the solution of it working specifically for me versus me having to spend time to figure out how to get these agents to work or customize it to my needs, right? That's the shift I'm kind of feeling on the front lines here.
Yeah, I think the parallels to kind of like the software 1.0 and all of that are really interesting. But I want to click too on the buyer side, because I think a lot of this is speculating about like how people make these buying decisions, what they adopt, build versus buy. Like those are probably the questions that are going to influence a lot of this. So Mike, I'm curious, what have conversations with utilities look like? And I think they're an interesting case because they're often regulated, probably quite risk averse. And I've heard from folks like, hey, they're really looking at how they can shake things up and be more innovative and bring in more of these solutions. So curious from your perspective, like how those conversations changed over the last little while.
Yeah, I'm going to steal words, so this is hearsay, but we not even hired, he joined us out of conviction. His name is Jeff Wright. He was previously the global vice president, which is like the CEO of Oracle's utilities division. And then before that, GE Vernova's utility division. And we were at EI 2 weeks ago, or 3 weeks ago now, which is a conference for the executives of these big IOUs. And I think the thing that stuck with me is he told everyone on the team, he's like, I have never in my career had access to the C-suite and the attention of the C-suite like I did this time around. And we're like, really? You don't just walk up and say, are you interested in AI? And they're like, here's my business card. And he's like, no, that's never been a thing. But that's what we've been doing. And so I think that's an interesting signal in that the appetite and behaviors have changed probably in every industry. In utilities, everybody's really smart, right? And these folks are seeing the curve, and they're seeing what they're signing up for with all these interconnections and data centers. They're seeing the mega deals that are being done with Anthropic. And there was one recently with Broadcom backed by Apollo for $65 billion for this data center, right? They're seeing this stuff and they're saying, okay, well, if we keep operating like we're operating and we've got 50% of our workforce retiring, like we probably need to change some things. Otherwise, we're going to implode. And so the utility space might be an interesting anecdote because we are on just this vertical, but the utility space has changed their appetite quite drastically in the last few years. I think they've now embraced startups more than they have. You see company or consortiums like EPRI that we're a part of, which is a bunch of the IOUs that work together we see EDA, which we're members and partners with, which is the consortium in Ontario for all the Ontario LDCs. We just partnered with them. Like everyone's looking at how can we just adopt the solution. Now, what I'll say is I think it's actually going to be a lot more painful before it gets better. So if you're a utility listening or you are selling to utilities, if you work in renewables and you're trying to hook up your DR or you're trying to be part of DERMS, a bigger system, DSOs might be the new name for LDCs now. If you're trying to be a part of that, just know like it's painful because I think the one corollary of building really great AI software that we haven't said is that it's super hard, right? Like I did mention, we made our harness 14 times. It's still probably the hardest product any of our engineers have ever worked on because we're trying to put determinism around something that's non-deterministic. We're trying to put speed around petabytes of meter data, which is not easy to do. And so I've seen in my experience, to answer your question, I've seen just like a lot of fraudulent AI and a lot of fraudulent selling and consultants coming in and trying to think about strategy when they don't really understand the fundamentals of why this technology works or how it works. And then on the other end, to be like an optimist too, I've seen some utilities that have started building themselves and have blown us away, right? Like these conversations with them are on a completely different caliber. And they're some of my favorite people to work with and partner with because I think together we're able to answer some of these hard questions. So that's a bit of the buying behavior. Over time, I'm probably going to expect more people will shift towards a broader AI strategy as they figure it out. They may get lost in the shuffle and it might be temporarily a bit painful and noisy, but for us, for example, this still looks like selling to wedges. So maybe the big spark note or soundbite there is, right, like nobody has an AI budget. I just want to make sure everybody hears this, right? Like nobody in the last 2 years, nobody in the last 6 months has come to me and been like, hey, our utility or our enterprise has a AI budget. And this is our AI budget for AI. And this is the ROI we expect from AI. Like that's not how it's working. I think you still have to do the wedge approach to Jordan's playbook and come in and say, okay, you've got budget to solve real problems. And whether that's an old school way of doing it or whether that's an AI native way of doing it, those are two options for you. Here's how an AI native solution looks like. And over time, ideally, you expand to have more agentic solutions as your mix and you keep it clean, concise on one platform. Like that would be the ideal approach for everybody. If we're being candid, but that's sort of what the sales motion looks like right now. And I think it'll probably continue that way because we tend to put budgets against problems and not technologies. Nobody had a computer budget either, right?
Well, and that was something I wanted to double click on was like, I feel like in the past 10 years, buyers of software knew their business really well, knew also like all of the competitors. I would imagine the buyer's familiarity and like sophistication around the actual software and like how it's built and AI and all this kind of stuff is lower than it has been in the past. So it seems like a shift more towards you really need to understand those business problems, and understanding your customer probably is a higher premium than it has in the past 10 years versus, expecting them to really understand what's possible.
Yeah, certainly. And Jordan, I was just going to ask you I was going to springboard off that. Like, how do VCs think about the risk reward for that? Because what Justin is saying is my life, which is, hey, this is really hard to build technology, but if you keep working at it and you keep solving the solution, you know that is the arrow, right? The compass points that way towards solving real problems. And if you're doing that, there is a reward at the end of it. So how do VCs think about that from like a investment profile versus trying to get ARR dollars right out of the gate, right? Prove to me the dollar figure and show me growth so I can underwrite this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a super challenging balance. And I think the companies that are experimenting right at the frontier, and I think like you guys kind of know which open models to use for which task, how to kind of calibrate utilities' interest in being able to run off of an open source model or run on their own cluster versus feeding critical context to Claude in the cloud that maybe they have less control over. Like I think in all of these industries, the startups that are closest to the frontier of all the capabilities of all the different models, knowing what prompts to feed where, how to route. It's not just optimizing for, cost and efficiency and token speed, but also like these models are good at different things. And so I think you have to have like some belief that the startups that are doing the best at it now are going to continue to execute well in terms of like taking these capabilities and translating them into products that have real impacts in terms of like accelerating interconnection queues or solving distribution problems, like all of these real world things. But it is tricky because like the past 10, 15 years, there've been very well trod playbooks in terms of like, okay, you are at 2 million in ARR. What's that worth from a multiple perspective based on how you're going to exit? And again, the zone of uncertainty is so massive right now. And so it is sort of a little bit of leaping into the blind unknown, but that's venture. So
I have probably 10 more questions we could go through. Maybe we could just close out with maybe a little bit of speculation, because I don't think there obviously isn't a clean answer here. But I'd love to talk about like what this looks like in practice, and maybe like what the new playbook could look like for climate software startups.
Yeah, that's why Jordan and I are going to be trillionaires, because we know the answer to that, right? I don't think anyone has a damn clue.
Yeah.
But I think I love that we acknowledge there's no clear answer and everyone's figuring it out. So like whenever that's the case and the cone of uncertainty is high, you default to doing the only thing that matters, which is creating real valuable solutions for customers who are in pain. And for me, I think the playbook continues to be just compounding those solutions. Like figure out what the scaffolding is to compound that. For us, I think we think of AI as an amazing scaffolding. So just food for thought, but like the reason all of us love Claude Cowork or Claude Code is because it connects to a few things and then it does sort of like anything under the sun. And we're always trying to give it that harder and harder task. So ambition premium, right? Just be super, the playbook is be super ambitious, come out with an idea. I think it used to be that VCs wanted something ambitious. I think now I'm feeling it. They want something even more ambitious, right? Like how will this take over the entire sector you're in, plus the adjacent sectors, and like what will this look like? Is now worth 100x more than that answer used to be maybe 2-3 years ago. I also think startups just have this amazing advantage to build, and that's going to be a question for Jordan. But the playbook is really just like get in from scratch and build really, really fast. For me, something that's ambitious. And the reason I say, Jordan might have the answer to that is as a portfolio company or an incumbent right now, I think a lot of them are frustrated in legacy code and them being stuck and not being able to really go as fast as they want to. And we're seeing the implications in real life for what it's worth too, right? With Square and folks doing massive layoffs just to try and increase speed as we figure out what the new org design looks like. So playbook is 100x more ambitious, 100x faster, and get into an industry where you think the incumbents are really stuck. That's my playbook. Is it going to be right? Let's follow up in like 10 years and see how Senpilot's doing.
Yeah. Jordan, what's your take on it?
I'm going to answer a slightly different question just because I feel like I did talk about this a little bit early on, and it's more around if you are an existing climate software startup and you are like 2, 5, 10, even 20 million in ARR with this kind of legacy ML model plus custom software harness to make that model work in a customer's context like that, it is a very hard place to be right now. I think there are a lot of founders with pressure from their board and their investors to have an AI strategy to do something because growth has kind of slowed down. There's new AI native entrants coming in and kind of challenging incumbency. And we were talking about earlier, everybody's sort of building everything. And so even if an AI native startup isn't replicating your core capability yet, they're certainly talking about the ability to do it and they're marketing that they can. And so this creates customer confusion. It impacts renewal cycles. It means, the 10% price increase you thought you were going to be able to push through this year, maybe you can't because the customer is asking you 10 questions about 10 new AI native startups that are claiming to do the same thing. So what do you do? And again, I don't have the answers here at all, but I think just pointing to some success stories. So this company Fin just exited for $3.5 billion like a week or two ago. That was a piece of software called Intercom, which was customer support. And it very much fit this model of like legacy cloud SaaS for solving customer support issues. And with the advent of AI models, first of all, they had tried, I think, to do AI native like 5 or 6 years ago. It was too early. And then ChatGPT came out November 2022, September 22, whenever it was. And they kind of re-platformed the whole company around this outcomes-based AI native assistant that you, rather than paying on kind of subscription ARR model, you pay per outcome. And that became the company to the point where they were, 100 million in ARR, really successful exit. But what it took was completely ground up rebuild and rethink of what the company and the product was. And I think that's the sort of creativity and intensity that a lot of existing climate startup founders really need to bring to their business if they are in this sort of stasis period, because just bolting on a chatbot or like some Gen AI feature or the 101st tab in QuickBooks is not solving the actual underlying issue with your business. If you're not an AI native company, you have to re-platform how all of your data and organizational context is collected, and then how that processes through to outcomes for the customer. And it's just, I really empathize with founders that are in that situation right now. It's not easy, and probably requires this total relook at the business and your role as a founder to go into hardcore founder mode and kind of build things back up.
I love that you say it's not easy. I thought about that must be the hardest thing to do in the entire world, because you know how hard it is to get to 5, 10, 20 million ARR. And then for your VC who you're great, but a lot of VCs are not. You get your annoying VCs that are saying, hey, this is fire drill, tier 1 alarm, everything needs to be rebuilt. And you think they're crazy because you just made it from 15 to 20 and next year to do 25, 30. And you're like, this is great. And the company's worth something. And then somebody's telling you, just tear it all down. Just tear it all down and start from day zero when you were in pain. And I genuinely applaud folks like the Windsurf team, if you know their story, where that founder was at 14 million ARR. And they were like, no, this is the future. These custom ML models are not good and they don't scale. I'm going to just cut the whole business, fire my customers, and I'm going to move on with my life and rebuild. And sweet, $1 billion acquired by Google and the team behind Devin. So that's cool, right? It sounds so easy to do, but I genuinely think I don't think I would be able to do it, right? I don't know who would be able to do that, but none of my friends have the courage to do that.
Yeah, it seems like a core capacity to pull the fire alarm, call a code red, whatever it is, and fully adapt is a more important capability than ever.
I said code red once, and back in November when we had this moment, and one VC replied to me and they said, hell yeah, code red, arm emoji. And I was okay, cool. We're, in it together, I guess.
Yeah. Maybe Jordan, could you just end with a couple, because we talked a lot about the startup side of this. Can you share a quick thought? You mentioned, venture is jumping into the unknown. Also, it seems like a lot of folks are just in hold mode. They don't know what the future is going to look like. We're not going to make any bets. We're going to see how this shakes out. How are you thinking about this? How do you think investors should be thinking about this? Cone of uncertainty also probably means huge upside, probably also huge downside. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is the debate every single week at our investment committee meetings. The last 2 deals we've done, one was an advanced geothermal developer called Rototherm, which is developing the coolest geothermal technology you've ever seen in terms of just building modular systems that take advantage of geologies that have not been tapped before. So we're super excited about that. We just did a silicon photonics interconnect manufacturing innovation company based here in Vancouver. It's physical infrastructure. This has always been the second bucket of what we do at Renewal. So, we've had these enterprise technology companies for physical infrastructure, mostly software and IoT. And then we've had production manufacturing innovations. And yeah, it sort of speaks for itself a little bit in terms of just the deals that we've been gravitating to. And that's not to say that we won't do software. We will. We're just trying to be very intentional about the spots that we pick. But it's a very real dynamic right now where just investing in software, because the playbook is so different than what made all of our initial software investments in these categories successful. And I'm speaking broadly on like as VCs, the model is different and valuations are different. The whole paradigm's different. And so there are going to be places to do extremely well. And we are just trying to kind of recalibrate and rethink how we do that. And there's places where that's more obvious. I talked about Super Circle. And then there's, pure software models where, we are very actively debating this. And the uncertainty just means it's harder to get that kind of cross-team alignment in terms of moving forward with an investment. Out of those types of processes usually come good outcomes in terms of like rigor, and everybody on a team has an investment team has sort of beat up an idea and everybody is comfortable with the risks. It's just harder to get that alignment than it was, 5-10 years ago on software only deals.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Cool. I feel like we could spend a whole other hour just talking about that side of things. So I appreciate you sharing those insights. Mike, Jordan, thanks for coming to the table and having this conversation. Hopefully this helps folks kind of update their priors, sharpen their thinking about what this is all going to mean. Really appreciate the conversation.
Super fun. Thanks for having us, Justin.
Thanks, Justin. Thanks, Mike.